Okay, let's unpack this. We've got this stack of sources you sent over articles, research, some notes, and they're all laser focused on one thing: the baseball rivalry between the Washington Nationals and the New York Mets.
And it's quite a subject to dive into, isn't it? This isn't just, another game on the schedule. It feels different.
It really does. So our mission today basically is to dig into these materials, pull out the most important insights, the key takeaways about this specific rivalry.
Yeah, and it's arguably one of the most underrated in baseball, like the sources suggest. It's been forged in some pretty dramatic moments, late inning heartbreaks, controversial calls, just real palpable drama.
Year after year, the intensity definitely comes through in the reading. So where does this really kick off? Because, I mean, the franchises go back a ways, but the rivalry itself, the heat we see now, feels much more recent.
That's right. You have to acknowledge the history, sure. The Mets go back to '69, the Miracle Mets era, when the Nats franchise was still up in Montreal as the Expos. But the sources are pretty clear. The real rivalry, the one that sparks these intense games we see today, that really ignited when baseball came back to Washington, D.C. in 2005.
Okay, that makes sense. And you can see in the materials how it sort of evolved through different phases, different eras.
Exactly. You had those early years establishing things. Then that really significant period defined by guys like Steven Strasburg and Bryce Harper for the Nats.
Huge impact players.
Absolutely. And that whole progression carried right through the Nats' unbelievable 2019 championship run. The sources really point that out as adding a completely new layer to the whole dynamic.
Oh, for sure. And that brings us right up to today with this kind of new generation of stars emerging on both teams.
Yeah, and the sources really highlight these specific moments. They aren't just scores in a box score. They feel like, I don't know, defining moments etched into the rivalry's DNA.
Like Bryce Harper's debut.
Yeah.
Against the Mets, no less, back in 2012. That felt big even at the time.
It felt less like a debut and more like someone lighting a fuse, didn't it? For basically the next decade of matchups. And then, that Noah Syndergaard pitch in 2015.
Right.
The sources treat that like an instant flashpoint, like a physical manifestation of all that brewing tension. Just boom.
Definitely. And it just kept escalating, right, into these super high-stakes games, like the winner-take-all wildcard game in 2019.
Crucial game.
Then later, things got really heated with that brawl game in 2022.
Yeah, that boiled over.
And even just recently, relatively speaking, that 18-inning marathon game in 2024, the sources almost describe it like a mini summary of the whole rivalry. Just relentless.
Those aren't just games, they become lore, right?
Yeah.
The sources suggest these moments aren't just highlights people replay, they actually fuel the fans and maybe add pressure to the next game.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The materials dig into the psychological stuff, the warfare beyond just hitting and pitching.
Yeah, this rivalry seems to have this extra layer of, mind games.
It definitely does. It's not just about who's got the better stuff that day. It's about getting inside the other guy's head. One analysis pointed out how pitchers work the inside corner in these games. It's not just strategy. It's like testing boundaries, sending a message.
And those little things you might not even notice, like specific batter's box routines players seem to really lean into in these games, almost like a psychological anchor or maybe trying to disrupt the pitcher's rhythm.
Right, and the dugout chirping. The sources mention it's pretty constant, stuff fans usually don't hear, but it's definitely part of the atmosphere on the field.
Yeah, there was even that specific story about a player pretending to lose a fly ball in the lights just to mess with the runner. That's not just baseball instinct, that's calculated mental gamesmanship.
And you can't really separate that from the fans, can you? The sources touched on that Mets fan identity, that sort of long-held underdog mentality, and how that colors how they see these games.
Well, Nats fans, especially after winning in 2019, seem to develop this championship swagger. The material suggests that shift in the Nats fan psyche really changed the feel of the rivalry from their side.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. How these teams are actually built. Because the sources gave a really interesting breakdown of their different approaches to roster construction. Very distinct paths.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast when you lay it out. The Mets, according to this analysis, have often gone all in, right? Investing big money in veteran stars, trying to win now through free agency.
Big contracts, familiar names.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the Nats, particularly in recent years, have really committed to rebuilding through their farm system. Player development, cultivating homegrown talent, that seems to be their focus.
And the analysis provided some clear metrics for that, didn't it? Like looking at the percentage of homegrown guys on the roster.
Right. Homegrown talent percentage, compared that to the sheer amount of free agent spending by each team, and then looked at their respective farm system rankings over time. It shows how those philosophies actually translate to the players on the field.
And it raises that compelling question, which the analysis definitely leans into. As of, say, 2025, which way seems to be working out better? Specifically in this head-to-head matchup, it frames the rivalry almost as a test case for these two competing strategies.
You see it reflected in the key trades, too, the ones that really shaped these current rosters.
So when they do meet, the materials point to these specific battles within the battle, things that consistently seem to be the turning points.
Yeah, they flagged 3 key matchups that often decide how a series goes. First, it's the ace versus ace showdown. When the Mets #1 guy faces the Nats #1, the sources basically call that must-see TV.
Sets the whole tone.
For sure, it becomes this intense pitching duel that kind of embodies the whole rivalry. Yeah. Then there's the speed versus defense aspect.
Oh, yeah. The Nats base running against the Mets shifts.
Exactly. The sources suggest the Nats are willing to push the envelope on the bases, really challenging the Mets' defensive positioning and forcing them to execute perfectly.
Puts the pressure on.
It does. And finally, the bullpen chess match. Late innings, high leverage, how the managers play their cards, deploy their relievers, lefty-lefty matchups, who gets the highest pressure spot. The sources say that's consistently a super tense, strategic battleground in these games.
And that ties back to the dugout strategies too, right? The analysis mentioned the Mets often seem to play for the big inning, looking for that 3-run homer to break things open.
Yeah, seeking the big blow, whereas the Nats, especially with their focus on speed and contact, seem more geared towards manufacturing runs. Small ball, move the runner, grind out an advantage. 2 different offensive philosophies playing out.
Okay, let's talk numbers. Because baseball loves stats, and the sources pulled out some really interesting data specific to this rivalry.
Yeah, lay it on us. What did they find?
Well, since 2010, the head-to-head record is remarkably close. Neither team has really dominated the other for a long stretch, and the run differential in these rivalry games, often razor thin. So many games decided by just 1 or 2 runs.
It feels that way when you watch them. Always tight.
And they seem to end up in extra innings against each other way more often than you'd expect.
They really do. The stats show their extra inning records against each other are kind of disproportionately high compared to playing other teams. Plus, you see the impact off the field, too. Attendance figures for Nats-Mets games consistently pop higher than other divisional games.
But here's the killer stat, according to one of the sources anyway. Games between the Nats and Mets average 18 minutes longer than the typical MLB game.
18 minutes? That's wow.
That number, the sources argue, basically quantifies the drama we've been talking about.
Yes.
It points to more deep counts, more pitching changes, more strategic pauses, more challenged calls, all the stuff that happens when these two teams just lock horns and refuse to give in.
Yeah.
It's like putting a number on the tension itself.
That's fascinating. It really captures it.
And you can't really talk about a rivalry like this without acknowledging the players who defined it, right? The sources definitely paid tribute to some legacy figures.
Absolutely. You have those guys who are just the face of their franchise for years, like David Wright for the Mets, Ryan Zimmerman for the Nats. Their matchups felt like the rivalry personified.
Icons for their team.
Totally. And then you get these really unique connections, like Max Scherzer, building this incredible legacy with both teams. The sources note how unusual that is for a pitcher of his stature to be so central to both sides of such an intense rivalry.
Yeah, that's a weird wrinkle. And Pete Alonso's name came up too, specifically how dominant he's been in this particular matchup. The numbers apparently show he just hits differently against the Nats.
Yeah, some guys just seem to find another gear in these rivalry games. It's like a theme running through the sources. Certain players consistently save their absolute best for Nats-Mets games. They rose to that specific occasion, that intensity.
So looking ahead then, based on what the sources are saying, where does this rivalry go from here? What's the future look like?
Well, the materials seem to paint a picture of a rivalry that's probably going to stay pretty compelling for a while. You've got the Nationals' young core, guys who are starting to mature and really show promise.
Right, starting to click.
And then you have the Mets, whose window to contend, according to the analysis, is still very much open. They're still built to compete right now.
So that combination, it suggests we could be looking at, what, maybe a decade of really meaningful high-stakes games between them as their competitive cycles kind of overlap.
Exactly. The sources even mentioned specific prospects bubbling up in both farm systems who could be the next generation of defining players in these matchups. So the ingredients seem to be there for this to stay a heated, really relevant rivalry for years to come.
So after digging through all this, the history, those dramatic flashpoints, the sight games, the different ways they build teams, the key matchups, the stats that show the tension, the players who became legends in this rivalry, and now looking at the future, yeah, one thing is crystal clear. Nationals versus Mets is just must-watch baseball.
Yeah, the sources really drive that home. Understanding all these layers, the history, the mind games, the strategy, the numbers, it absolutely deepens how you experience it when you watch them play. It's way more than just another game. It's this whole ongoing story.
Mm-hmm. A really complex narrative.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with, something to chew on from all this is, how do those specific moments and stories, the Syndergaard pitch, the crazy 18-inning game, Harper's debut, the Zimmerman Wright era, how do they continue to shape the future rivalry? Not just as historical footnotes, but do they embed themselves in the memory of the players, the fans, maybe adding this unseen weight or pressure to every pitch, every swing in the games to come, ensuring that drama we've talked about just keeps playing out?